Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this edition of the 700 Club. You know, we have a very interesting president of the United States. He's doing some marvelous things. He's put together one of the best cabinets in memory, and yet the Washington Post and the New York Times want to destroy him. So the New York Times writes a story about a memo that nobody has seen from a person that they're not sure wrote it, and it has not been disclosed to anybody. And yet the networks are picking up these things that say, breaking news, Trump asked Comey to chill on Flynn. I mean, people talk all the time. And they talk, prosecutors talk, people talk, and they say, look, this accused is a pretty nice guy, let's go easy on him. Or let's cut a deal and you know, 2 years instead of 20. I mean, it happens all the time. And there's nothing about obstruction of justice. Nobody was ordering anybody to do anything. It is not a crime. And certainly for a man's boss to say to his subordinate, this man is really a good guy, and I hope we can take it easy on him. So what? Headlines, breaking news, shocking destruction of democracy? Nonsense. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time we get it together and realize the New York Times is an agent of the left. They are not a credible news source anymore. They used to be. They used to be the paper of record. Not anymore. They're a left-wing rag. The Washington Post, the same thing. And to use them as sources over and over again makes me sick at my stomach because they are dreadfully biased. Okay, Wendy's here. I hope you agree. If not, you can disagree.
There's such a double standard. It makes you want to scream.
Look, I faced the Washington Post. I ran for president. And some of the stuff they did was just absolutely appalling. I mean, it was utterly appalling. And I got so, you know, Ben Bradley was editor. I really wanted to get to the point where I could get him in the ring and let him have it. I mean, it was just so awful what they do. And to make believe that these people are credible, nonsense.
It is nonsense. Well, that controversy came as the president stood up for an evangelical pastor who's currently in jail in Turkey. CBN News White House correspondent Jennifer Wishon brings us the story from Washington.
Another news cycle, another headache for President Donald Trump. This time, someone leaked an FBI memo to the New York Times that former Director James Comey allegedly wrote after an Oval Office meeting with the president. Written one day after former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn resigned. The newspaper quotes the president in the memo as telling Comey, "I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go, to letting Flynn go. He is a good guy." The White House fired back. While the president has repeatedly expressed his view that General Flynn is a decent man who served and protected our country, the president has never asked Mr. Comey or anyone else to end any investigation. Last week, acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe told a Senate hearing that there had been no effort to impede the investigation into Russian interference in the presidential election. The story came a day after a separate leak to the Washington Post accused the president of disclosing classified information during a recent meeting with the Russian foreign minister and ambassador. But National Security Advisor General H.R. McMaster doubled down on his defense of the president.
The president in no way compromised any sources or methods in the course of this conversation.
McMaster, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, and Deputy National Security Advisor Dina Powell were all in the room and all concluded the president's conversation was appropriate. McMaster says instead the actual threat comes from leaks of confidential conversations.
Our national security has been put at risk by those violating confidentiality.
President Trump himself weighed in on his meeting with the Russians.
We had a very, very successful meeting with the foreign minister of Russia. Our fight is against ISIS, and we want to get as many to help fight terrorism as possible.
As these controversies played out, an increasingly controversial world figure arrived at the White House, Turkish President Recep Erdogan. After narrowly winning a referendum that gives him power over all three branches of government, President Erdogan is leading Turkey towards authoritarianism. It's a slippery slope away from democracy that's been especially harsh for Christians and other non-Muslims living in the country.
President Erdogan is sending a powerful message, and that message is that Christianity, religious freedom have no place in Turkey.
Reverend Patrick Mahoney of the Christian Defense Coalition and other Christians gathered outside the White House to pray during the leaders' meeting.
On the issue of religious freedom, human rights, and the release of Pastor Andrew Brunson.
Their prayers were answered. A White House official tells CBN News exclusively that President Trump went to bat for Pastor Andrew Brunson, raising his case twice. Vice President Mike Pence also brought it up. Brunson, an American pastor, has been imprisoned in Turkey since October. He was swept up in a terrorism investigation but never formally charged. Aykan Erdemir, a former member of Turkish parliament, calls Brunson's case bogus. He says President Trump must be firm with Erdogan.
Erdogan, I think, deals best with politicians who push him back. He only respects politicians who have a strong stance, and probably the best strategy for Trump is to continue a principled engagement, to convey to his counterpart that Erdogan and his inner circle's incitement against the U.S. and U.S. officials is not acceptable as NATO partners.
It's just one of the major issues the administration is dealing with, while also trying to put out growing political fires here in Washington. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, the White House.
Thanks, Jennifer. Well, one of the president's most successful appointments has been that of former Governor Nikki Haley as the ambassador to the United Nations. In an exclusive interview, CBN's David Brody talked to Ambassador Haley about several key issues, including whether or not the United States should move its embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. Here's David's report from the United Nations.
Well, it is definitely a different and new day in D.C. under President Trump, but it is also a new day here in New York at the United Nations. And that's because the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, has been showing strength right from the get-go. As a matter of fact, she said, if you don't have the United States back, well then, quote, we are going to be taking names. So there was no nonsense right from the start, and we came up here to talk with Nikki Haley one-on-one. And she talked about a lot of different subjects, but obviously Russia in the news, Israel as well. This latest stuff that's been in the news about the president and Russia and some of this classified material that's been out there. What is your take on that? How hard is this to navigate at the UN when you have stories like this coming from the Washington Post? What's been your reaction to something like that?
Typically, the international community has not talked with me about domestic issues. Now, certainly it's a little fresh, so we'll see what happens with this issue and how it plays out. You know, the one thing we want to make sure of is that, you know, if there was some sort of abuse of classified information, that's serious. But going by what General McMaster has said, he doesn't believe that has happened, and we'll have to wait and see. The
media is going to try to make a rift between the president, not necessarily the President Netanyahu, but U.S. and Israel as it relates to this whole Western Wall thing that's come up now. I mean, what do you say to folks that, you know, there was that report about Western Wall not being part of Israel? I mean, that's got to be a bit controversial.
You know, I don't know what the policy of the administration is, but I believe the Western Wall is part of Israel. And I think that that's how, you know, we've always seen it, and that's how we should pursue it. I'm not real sure what happened with that issue, but I know that they're trying to fix that and get that taken care of. But, you know, we've always thought that the Western Wall was part of Israel.
I understand it's the administration, the White House, that will answer about the Jerusalem embassy question. I get that. That's not your purview. But from a United Nations standpoint, I mean, what's the tricky part of that? I mean, that will be very controversial if it ever did happen. So How does this president, how does this administration kind of negotiate that? Because that was a promise, if you will, that he did say on the campaign trail that he wanted to do it. Now, maybe his heart does, but there's politics involved too here, and a lot more than that. So,
right. You know, I mean, obviously, I believe that, you know, the capital should be Jerusalem and the embassy should be moved to Jerusalem, because if you look at all of their government is in Jerusalem. So much of what goes on is in Jerusalem. And I think that we have to, you know, see that for what it is. I think the tricky part is where the Palestinians come in on this and where the Israelis come in on this. We know the Israelis don't want to give on Jerusalem at all, and we have to see how strong the Palestinians stand on that. But I think that's your touchy part, is Jerusalem even on the table? I don't know that it is. And, you know, we may stop just with that talking point, but we'll have to wait and see.
Nikki Haley talking about two crucial issues in the world right now. And of course, there are so many other issues that she is dealing with. We discussed many of them. You can catch it on my blog, cbnnews.com. Just go to the Brody File. By the way, the president will be going overseas on his world religion tour to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, Jerusalem, and Rome. CBN News, yours truly, will be with the president every step of the way. David Brody, CBN News in New York.
Thanks, David. I might add, we have on this program, I'll be interviewing David Oren, who is the Israeli ambassador. I want to get into his head. He's a brilliant guy and written some very cogent books about the whole conflict. And I think we'll have something important. That's on Monday's program on the 700 Club. And I want to, you know, I'm going to get into it as deeply as I can. I won't hold any punches. We'll see what happens. But Nikki Haley, by the way, fantastic UN ambassador. She tells it like it is. She's a wonderful person. A distinguished governor of South Carolina, but who would have thought that she would emerge from South Carolina and become such a world figure? Wendy, terrific.
It's nice to see. It's nice to see a female in that role, too.